Well, I'm so excited to be speaking for my very first time here on this weekend, and I really value and appreciate the opportunity that Pastor Dave has given me to stand up here and just kind of give you what I believe God's laid on my heart as we go into week 2 of this amazing series called Habits. Now, last week, Pastor Dave did a great job kicking this off when he was talking about how to invest more time into our families. But first, we do this every week. Let's go ahead, take out your phones, all right? Let's go ahead and turn them either to silent or turn them off. But we want to go ahead and check in the social media, okay? So whatever social media you're connected to, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or christianmingle.com, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for you. Tinder, if you need to swipe left and then check in, whatever that looks like. And there's 2 reasons why we do this, guys. Number 1 is a lot of you have been telling your family that you follow Jesus now and you go to church and they don't believe you, so you could stick it to them by saying, look, I'm checking in to New Life every week. But the other reason is because we've already had people come up to us and let us know what kind of conversations this has started in their life. Because people see them check in on the weekend at a church and they've got something going on in their life and they just really need to connect with someone. And so when we put that we are checking into a church, you have no idea the opportunities it's going to create for you. So help us out and make sure you check in and just let people know that, hey, I'm in New Life. There's some exciting things going and we are ready to go. The last thing is inside your program is this note-taking sheet. You'll see some fill in the blanks. If you're a guest with us, this is how we keep up with our messages here at New Life. Now, years ago, a long time ago, back in the 1800s, before refrigeration was even invented, the people specifically up in the northern states, the way that they would keep things cold for a long extended amount of time is they would go to an area lake or an area pond and then they would cut big chunks of ice during the winter out and then they would bring it back home and then they would create kind of their own refrigerator. So their own little ice box, their own little ice chest. And so that's how everybody in the communities did it. So any game that they killed, they would just stuff into there and it would keep it cold for a long time. Well, the way that they kept the ice from melting is in each community was a sawdust shed, if you will. And so all the sawdust that came from sawing wood and chopping wood for the winter, they would gather it all together and they had one central location in each community that they would take the sawdust to and they would just kind of store it in there so that people could come and grab it as they needed it. And then they would coat the ice with this sawdust and it would insulate it from melting and it would last for weeks and sometimes even months and keep their stuff cold. One particular man was in there and he was gathering up all the sawdust and so he got home and he got everything done. He reached down in his pocket, lost his watch. And he knew that he lost it in that big pile of sawdust. So he went back to the sawdust shed and he was digging around and throwing sawdust everywhere, trying to find this watch and he couldn't find it. So he's frustrated and he starts going home and this little boy sees him. He says, "Sir, I'll find your watch for you." He said, "Man, young man, that would be great. If you could do that, I'd really appreciate that." And he walked away, giving up, not thinking that this boy was going to be successful. So the boy gets in there and he digs around in there and he just covers himself up with sawdust. He's all the way up into it. And then he just stops and he gets really quiet and still. And then he listens and he hears. And it gets louder and louder and he digs around and he finds the watch. And so he runs to the man and he said, "Hey, I found the watch. I found your watch." And the guy was just amazed. He couldn't believe it. He said, "How in the world did you find that? I looked all over. I couldn't find it." And the boy said, "Oh, it was easy. I just waited till everybody left. I got really still and I listened." I want to talk to you this weekend about how we need to create a habit of listening in our lives. Because not only spiritually, whenever God's trying to communicate something to us, because I know God communicates to several different people in many different ways, depending on your personality and however you believe that God communicates to you, but also physically, we need to become better listeners. We need to create a healthy habit in our life of listening to each other. Because oftentimes what people really need in their life is just a good listening to. We need to become better listeners in our marriage, and with our kids, and with our parents, with our boss, with our coworkers, and even in our communities, all around us, we need to create a really healthy habit of listening. Because let's all admit it, none of us are good at this. None of us are good at listening. If we were, we wouldn't have all the chaos and all the problems in our lives that we do. We wouldn't have all the misunderstandings if we really tuned in and focused on people as they were talking to us and listening. And especially in today's society, in our environment, because we're so bombarded and overloaded. We're in this information overload environment. And you know this, if you really want to pay attention to someone, if you really want to listen, you have to focus in and be intentional about what they're saying to you. And if you're like me, when everything is completely stripped away of all the noise and all the distractions and all the people and all the circumstances, and it's just you and no one else inside of your head and inside your inner ears, it's still really noisy sometimes. When you're all alone from your busy day of work and your family is down for the night, the TV is actually off, and you're able to sit by yourself in silence, if you ever get to do that, you're still playing over conversations that you had that day, or you're pre-playing conversations that you know that you're going to have the next day. They haven't even happened yet, but you've already got an outcome for both scenarios. And it just doesn't shut off. Our brains never shut off. And I know you're probably thinking, Jeremy, if that's going on with you, you know we have doctors for that, right? If you're hearing voices, maybe you need some help. Well, growing up, my brothers and I, we had this amazing 13-inch black and white TV. It was awesome. 3 channels that we had to turn physically, you know. And on the top of this TV, we had these 2 antennas. And so we had to get in there, we had to adjust these antennas and just kind of dial it in, because it'd be real staticky, especially if the weather wasn't good and the weather was kind of cloudy and there's a lot of, static electricity in the air. We kind of really had to focus in. And then right when we got it right, we would just back off and dare each other to touch it because we got the good signal. But we couldn't get the right signal because of all the static that was going on. We weren't tuned in just right. And I think a lot of times the same thing goes on in our souls, guys. Oftentimes our souls are just filled with so much static and so much stuff and so much junk that we're trying to get a clear signal from someone and we can't pick up on it because we're not tuned in. The same thing with our relationship with God. I think God sometimes is trying to communicate with us, but because we're so busy, we can't focus in on what he's trying to tell us. We can't focus in on the signal. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 2. Proverbs is a book in the Old Testament, which is just a lot of great wise sayings. It says this: tune your ears to wisdom and concentrate on understanding. Now, last week, Pastor Dave gave kind of the template definition of the word habit that we're going to kind of use throughout the rest of this series. And that definition is this: an acquired pattern of behavior regularly followed until it becomes almost involuntary. What if we created a habit in our lives that we listened so well, so often, that it became almost involuntary? So just like last week, here's how I'm going to lay it out. Just like last week, I'm going to give you 3 enemies or 3 distractions that try to keep us from becoming better listeners. And then I'm going to give you 3 self-awareness practices of being proactive in how to become better listeners, okay? So we want to do the 3 enemies first. And so here are the 3 enemies that I believe, if we're not careful, can sneak into our lives and keep us from being better listeners. And number 1 is busyness. Number 1 is busyness. Busyness says, I just don't have time to listen. Now remember last week, we talked about one of the enemies to investing time into our families can be time if we're not careful. And busyness is one of our enemies that will keep us from becoming better listeners because it causes this anxiety in us that convinces us that we just don't have the time to sit and to listen to someone. It convinces us that we don't have the bandwidth in our lives to really pause, take time, turn to someone, focus in on them, and just listen. Because we think if we stop and listen, that means we might have to talk and process. And if we have to stop and talk and process, that means we may have to give a response to what is being said. And then we think, but I just don't have time for that. And I'm the worst for this, guys. I'm telling you right now. I carry my emotions. I carry my feelings. I carry the way that I'm feeling about something on my face and my eyes. I don't like it. I've tried to overcome it over the years that I've been alive, and it's just my personality. I guess I can never run from it. But I can't stand for me on Sunday morning when I'm running around and man, I'm trying to get things done. And I'm trying to just create a great environment because I know that there's going to be guests coming in, and I want things just to be perfect. And inevitably, someone always comes up to me and says, Pastor Jeremy, I know you're really busy, but can I talk to you for a minute? And guys, I hate that. Not that they want to talk to me, but that I look so busy that I appear unapproachable or inattentive because I love people. And I want to be who God created to be and be available for people. But busyness sometimes is a big enemy of mine, and it can be an enemy of yours as well. The second enemy, if we're not careful, is lack of interest. Just lack of interest. Lack of interest says, I just don't care what this person's saying. Listen, you may not care or have any interest in what the person is saying to you, but let me just kind of give you a jolt of reality. It's not about you. It's about me. I'm just kidding. It's not about me. Maybe it is about me. I don't know. But I may not understand or comprehend what this person's even talk about. I may, especially if it's an area that I have zero knowledge. If I don't know what they're talking about, then I can look. It appears that I have no interest at all. But I have to remember that it's not about me. The person that I'm engaged with the conversation just wants to be heard. They just want you to listen. Because I promise you, you're not always going to connect with every topic that you have a conversation with. But we just need to be good listeners. Just last week, my daughter, Taylor, she's 19 and she's a phenomenal singer and she's just like me. She's really outgoing. If you've never engaged in conversation with my daughter, Taylor, one day you will. Because Taylor will talk to anyone at any time and for a long time. So if you're ever engaged in a conversation with Taylor and you ever think, I wonder if she's leaving out any details, she's not. I promise you are getting every single detail. So she had this great idea, and so she's talking to me, and I know I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm doing this message, and I've got all these things going on in my head now that I'm going to be talking about this weekend, so I need to focus in and just turn to her and just give her my undivided attention. I need to let her know that I'm focused on her, and I did through every single detail. I sit and listen. In a recent study, actually in San Francisco, researchers asked teenage female prostitutes, what is one thing in your life that you didn't get that may have changed the course of the way you're living your life now? Unanimously, through their tears and through their sadness, they all said the same thing. I wish someone would have listened to me. I wish someone cared enough just to listen to me. Don't allow your lack of interest keep you from really engaging in conversation with someone and listening well. And the third thing is selfishness. Selfishness can be the third enemy. And you think, wait a minute, I was here last week. Selfishness was one of the enemies of investing time into my family. Yeah, it may be next week too. Selfishness is a big one. So it may be number 3 for the entire series because all of us have selfish ways about us that if we don't overcome will be an enemy of investing and creating a habit of listening in our lives. Married couples, listen to this. The second leading cause for divorce in North America right now is a breakdown in communication. You know what that means? That means couples are telling therapists, they're telling counselors, he or she doesn't listen to me. One day a wife was talking to her husband, and this went on for several minutes, and she finally looked over at him. She said, are you even listening to me? And he said, well, and he paused, and he thought, what a weird way to start a conversation. Several years ago, before I got into full-time occupational ministry, I was in sales, and I was in the corporate world. I did that for about 14 years before I got into ministry. And so every day I would come home. Now, this was in Tennessee, so it would be hot. You know, I know you guys have the heat here too, but we have the heat plus the humidity there. So I would work 10, 12-hour days, and I would come home and just exhausted. And as soon as I would walk in the door, there's my beautiful bride. And then Caleb did this, and then Taylor did this, and look what I did in the living room. Oh, look at outside. Look, I playing at this. And I'm just sitting there, and just finally, after I got up enough nerve, after several years of this, I finally got the nerve, and I said, honey, here's the deal. When I come home, I don't want to talk. I just want to be, all right? Because I just spent the last 10 to 12 hours, that's all I did was talk. I was in sales. And so when I come home, I want it to be quiet. And Janet's response was great. She's a feisty Southern girl. So her response was, well, guess what? My conversations today were with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So you don't have to talk, but you are going to listen. I said, hey, fair enough. I'm good with that. So that next day, Janet and I started a ritual that, in my opinion, has been one of the greatest things that we ever did in our marriage. I would come home from work, and Janet knew that I was just going to be exhausted and hot. She pulled the air conditioning down to the 60s. So when I walked in, there's like, it felt so good. And Janet would be in a hoodie, you know, she didn't care. She just wanted the house to be cool. So I would go and I would take a shower and I would come out and then we would put some cartoons on for the kids and from the team. Then we would shut the door and we laid on the bed and we talked for no less than 45 minutes a day. We just laid there and we just talked. And when I look back, those were the times that Janet and I connected the most. Those were the times that really kind of sealed the deal in our marriage. Being able just to listen to each other, being able just to communicate and talk. Because what I was telling Janet for those 45 plus minutes every day is, babe, 100% of my attention right now is on you. My eyes, my body language, my attention, my focus, everything is right on you. You have it. And it was so awesome because I didn't want to be that boy crawling around through the sawdust, listening for that ticking sound, and that ticking sound only be seconds passing away of me not connecting with my wife. Janet never was going to allow my selfishness to keep us from really connecting. So I know you're thinking, okay, Jeremy, I've messed this whole thing up because all 3 of these enemies are actually my friends, okay? Because I'm selfish, I always am too busy, and I have zero interest in what people are talking about. So how do I get better at this? Okay, well, guess what? Jump on my train because I'm the driver here, all right? I am just as bad as anybody else, and so we are going to learn how to get through this together, okay? So here's the fact. People don't care the advice you give them. They just want to know that you listen. They don't care about the advice you give them. They want to know, are you going to listen to what they have to say? James chapter 1, verse 19 says this: let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Now, I know that sounds easy enough on paper. It sounds easy enough on principle, but the reality of it is that's pretty difficult because most of the time we get that backwards. Most of the time we are slow to hear, we're quick to speak, and we're quick to get angry. So learning to listen will not happen overnight. It takes discipline, it takes effort, it takes intentionality. And just like last week, Pastor Dave talked about how it's the little increments of time. Okay, it's something that doesn't come overnight. Doing one big thing with your kids is not going to save this relationship. It's the little increments of time. And the same thing when it comes to listening. It's the little increments of time that you invest listening that's going to make you a better listener. And if you're married, or if you have kids, I promise you're going to be given lots of opportunities to sit down and to really listen, okay? So here are 3 self-awareness practices to become better listeners. Number 1, I'm going to give my full attention. I'm going to give my full attention. Every good conversation begins with good listening. Every good conversation begins with good listening. When we're not attentive to what the person is trying to say, it diminishes them and what they're trying to communicate to us. But when we are attentive and we listen well, we're letting them know, hey, look, I'm hearing you and I value you. I'm hearing you, and right now you're the most important thing to me right now because I'm blocking everything else out. Because remember, most of the time they just need you to be there and to listen. When you're with someone, listen, really be with them. Communicate that you and what you're saying to me right now is the most important thing that's going on of everything around me. Excuse me. We also need to neglect everyone and everything else around us for that moment. Look directly into their eyes. You'd be amazed at what you can absorb through somebody's eyes when they are talking to you. Now, I don't mean be one of those creepers, if they're staring at you, I don't want you to be, yeah, really? That's just odd. All right, that's just awkward. Don't make them run from you. Make them want to communicate with you. But just make some eye contact, all right? Don't be looking around at other people when someone's talking to you. Watch their facial expressions. Watch their body language. Our body language says a lot. Position your body in a way that says, boom, you've got my attention. I'm focused right on you. Our body language communicates a lot. Almost daily, I do this, and you do this too. So I don't need no judgment right now. But when somebody's trying to talk to you and you're walking away, it's the I'm listening, but I'm walking away at the same time. Go on. I'm listening. Go ahead. No, you ain't. We're not listening. We need to be right there, right in the moment. And I am really bad for that. I do that all the time. Forget your phone for a moment, all right? This thing can be one of the most distracting culprits from ever keeping us from being a good listener. Because you do this and you've seen it done as you're talking to somebody. When you're sitting there talking to them and they got their head down. You're like, if I wanted to talk to the top of your head, I would say, bow your head, please, as I'm talking to you. But they sit there and they do this and they do this and they look up and they look up and they're still looking around and they say, oh, I'm listening. No. And then I got 31 likes on my Facebook post. Just like, no, put the phone down. Also, we need to learn not to sit and think about our response while they're talking. This one's a big one for me as well. I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say as they're talking. We need to just let them talk. And this, like I said, this is another big one for me. When I first got into ministry back in 2005, a lady came up to me with her daughter and she said, hey, Pastor Jeremy, can we come by and talk to you sometime this week? So they came into my office. I'll bet they were there for 2 hours and I didn't let them get 10 sentences in. As soon as they told me why they were there, I immediately had a response for them. I immediately was trying to tell them how to fix this. They walked out of my office 2 hours later and I thought, you know what? I just wasted 2 hours of their time because I didn't let them talk. I did all the talking. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13 says this, spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. Who is the shameful one, the foolish one? This guy. Listening does not mean waiting to speak. We think that sometimes. And Janet, again, had to train me on this one as well, because you see, just like you, there are multiple sides of Jeremy Moore. There's husband Jeremy. There's dad Jeremy. There's Pastor Jeremy. There's friend Jeremy. Just like you, I have multiple different sides. And when Janet would come home and there's something that she needs to process through and something happened to her at work or whatever, and she's kind of going through some things, and immediately I'm thinking, hey, I got the answer to this. I know how to fix this. Husbands, you're right there with me. I know we all think like that. We all think if our wives would just be quiet long enough, we'll give them the answer. We just need them to go ahead and say it, and then we're going to give them the resolution. So Janet had to program me and train me to quit doing that. So this is how Janet this is how she began her conversations with me. Okay, babe, I don't want you to pastor me. I don't want you to be my friend. I don't want you to counsel me. And I don't even want you to fix it. I just want you to... All the ladies said, listen. All the guys didn't say a word. That's right. They just need us to listen. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 7 says this. This is another book in the Old Testament. It has a lot of incredible, powerful sayings in there, wisdom sayings. It says there's a time to tear and there's a time to sow. There's a time to keep silence and there's a time to speak. In other words, timing is everything, but it's up to you and I, guys, to figure out what that balance is. So when they have my full attention, it's going to make me a better listener. Number 2. To become a better listener. Listening better helps me connect better. Listening better helps me connect better. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5 says this, though good advice lies deep within the heart, a person with understanding will draw it out. Remember what we said a few minutes ago, that we need to tune our ears to wisdom and that we need to concentrate on understanding. And then we see here that if we concentrate on understanding, we gain that understanding, we're actually able to draw that out of someone's life and out of their heart. Oftentimes while listening well, we'll hear something that's not being verbally said, but is kind of being communicated. And good listening asks very perceptive, open-ended questions, not just something that's going to get a yes or no, but something that's going to kind of peel back the onion and dig a little bit beneath the surface. A good listener will carefully watch for nonverbal communication. Not that They're going to interrogate or kind of pry into someone's private life that they don't want to share. But sometimes what they need is just someone to kind of pull that out of them so that they can see it from a different angle or different perception that maybe they're not able to see. When it comes to solutions or asking questions, Janet and I always try to stay away from words and phrases like "you should" or "you need to." When somebody talks to you, you say, "Oh, you should do this. You need to do this." And we try to stay away from the words "always" and "never," because those are both lies in your marriage. You always do this. No, they don't. You never do this. Sometimes they do. So we try to stay away from words like that because all that does is cause the defenses to go up, and then that doesn't benefit anyone. But when we say things like, "Hey, what if?" or "could you?" or "I wonder if," we got to learn to ask good questions because it makes us better listeners. And when we do that, we'll also find a deeper connection. We'll also find a deeper level of trust, not only with our spouse, but with our friends and our family as well. Now, with that said, there are boundaries that we should never cross in regards to who we sit and listen to, where we sit and listen to them, and how we sit and listen to them. We have to be very careful not to cross those boundaries, especially with the members of the opposite sex. Over my ministry, I've counseled numerous couples that are on the border of infidelity, whether it's emotional or physical infidelity. And almost all the time, almost every time when I say, "How did this begin?" I found this person because he or she really listened to me. We need to listen to our spouses. And the third self-awareness that we need to grab a hold of when it comes to learning how to be a better listener and creating that habit is to understand this. Being a good listener reflects my relationship with God. Being a good listener reflects my relationship with God. Our inability to listen well to others may be a direct reflection on how well we listen to God. If we don't have time to sit and listen to God when He wants us to, then we're certainly not going to have the time to sit and listen to our family or our friends or our neighbors or whoever. Proverbs chapter 12 says this: "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." Whether that's advice from our friends or our coworkers or our boss or even from God, a wise man will listen to advice. Now, I've never physically or audibly heard the voice of God. I wish I could say that I have. But sometimes I wonder if He were to ever speak to me, would I hear it? Am I so busy? Am I so unavailable that I wouldn't hear God if He really tried to speak to me? And I actually believe that that's the beginning of the death of someone's spiritual life, is that when we feel like we're so busy and unavailable that we don't have the time to sit and listen to God. And Jesus is our ultimate model when it comes to listening, when it comes to really connecting with people. There's lots of examples in the Bible, but let me just give you a few. Jesus listened intently to the rich young ruler when he asked Jesus if there's basically a shortcut into heaven. Jesus listened to him, and then He answered. He listened intently to the intellectual Jew Nicodemus when he was asking about the term Jesus used, "born again." Jesus listened to him, and then He answered. He listened intently to the Samaritan woman at the well when she lied about her life and her past. Jesus let her talk, He listened to her, and then He answered her. He listened intently to the children as they tried to approach Him and the adults were pushing them off. And Jesus looked at the adults, He said, "Stop it, let those kids come to me. I wish you as adults had the faith of these little kids." He listened to those little kids and then He answered them. Now, I don't know if you were listening to the common denominator in all of those examples I just gave you. But the reason why Jesus was able to sit and to listen to each one of these examples, each one of these people as they came to Him, is because Jesus made Himself available. And I believe that is the ultimate way to becoming a better listener, which is simply asking ourselves, am I available? Am I making myself available to listen to my kids? Am I making myself available to listen to the advice of friends? Am I making myself available to really sit and have a conversation and listen to my spouse? Am I making myself available to really sit, block out all the distractions, get still, and listen to God. Last story, and then I'll close. A few days ago, it was one of those days where I had a lot of conversations, talked a lot, and had lots of meetings, but there was one more conversation that I needed to have. I put it off until the end. And so finally, my brain was kind of fried. I was overloaded. You guys have been there. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You're just ready. It's at the end of the day, and you're just ready to go home. But I knew I needed to have this one more conversation, and so I approached this individual, and we started engaging in conversation. I'd already kind of started putting this message together, so I knew how I should be listening, but I wasn't. And man, I just got very convicted. I started feeling guilty because I should be engaged and focused on this person. So I finally just put my ADD aside, and I just kind of really focused in on this person. I really locked eyes with them, and I stopped being fidgety, and I just was still, and I was communicating to this person, you have my attention. And can I tell you that it was the best and most important conversation I had that day. But I had to be super intentional about making sure that I was listening. It was not only beneficial for me as a person, but it was beneficial for the church here at New Life. What this person had to say to me, I thought it was amazing. So what about you? Challenge time. Who in your life have you not been engaging in healthy listening? Who's the one person? With whom are you not making yourself available to really sit and to pause and to listen? So I just want to challenge you. This week, pick one person. Pick the most important person that you really need to sit and listen to. It might be your kids. Maybe your kids have been trying to vie for your time. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it is a friend who's been trying to speak some life into you and speak encouragement, but you just reject it. You won't listen to it. But maybe, just maybe you need to listen to God. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this opportunity that you have given me to just speak your words. Lord, so many times, God, we do get busy and we forget to just sit and have a conversation with you. Sometimes it's just a one-way conversation of us talking to you. But I think oftentimes, God, you're trying to speak to us somehow, some way, whether it's through reading the Bible or whether it's just hearing something in our spirit or kind of, I don't know. I know there's different ways that you communicate with us, Lord. And I think sometimes we're too busy. We don't sit down. We don't focus in. We don't turn our attention to you for what you're really trying to say to us. Help us, God, to become better listeners, Lord. Not only to you, but God, also the people we come in contact with. Lord, you desire for us to have community. You desire for us to have healthy relationships. And the only way that we're able to do that is if we seriously just focus and sit down and look at each other in the eyes and just really listen. Take the time to listen to each other. And I just pray this week, God, that you would just put that person, that one person, that challenge that I've given, that one person in our hearts that we say, I'm going to be super intentional. I'm going to put forth extra effort to grab hold of this person and let them know that they have my attention. I know inside of marriages are going to be stronger. Inside of relationship with kids, that relationship is going to be stronger. With friends, with neighbors, with coworkers, Lord, all these relationships are going to get stronger and stronger because of this. We lean on you. We love you. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.